All right, deep breath. We're live, man. When the thing goes on live, it's like, whew, it's on. All right, man. Well, today you had a tweet length topic you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so I wanted to run this by you, see if you had any reaction. But
All
my
right.
idea was about soliciting honest feedback. So if you're entering a new field, say you're like an undergrad and you're entering the PhD program, or you're in your case, you're a PhD and then you become a professor, like the new field that you enter is pretty complicated, right? Like being a PhD student, there's a lot of new stuff you have to learn, and um, like not everything is in a book or a blog, right? And
Yeah.
so it really helps to get information from other people. But part of the challenge with getting feedback from other people is that like honesty is or maybe openness is a tough thing. Like if you're talking with someone and they don't like your work or they don't like whatever you're talking about, there are a lot of polite ways to kind of go around that, to kind of avoid the issue. And so like, I was just wondering whether you had any thoughts in terms of like, did you struggle with this at any point, and like, did you overcome it at some point, or were you naturally decent at getting feedback?
That's a great question. I think I've always been pretty bad at getting feedback. Um, no, it's one of those things where like I know that it's good for me, but I don't do it enough probably. Yeah, I think I'm at the point where I know it's a good thing. Um, but I still probably should do it more than I have. Um, yeah, I mean, I think there are many people who don't realize what a powerful thing that is, and but I do realize what a powerful thing is. It's just hard to do, right?
Like you do in your, do you see room to improve in your situation?
I um, I yeah, I think that there's always room to improve. I just feel like I'm pretty maxed out on what I'm doing now, so that like any bigger improvement is such a step above in terms of like what effort I need to put in and the pain I need to take and like yeah, it just seems like it's not a gentle hill up, right? So I'm like, all right, I'm good for now.
Oh, yeah. For you, what is that next level?
um, and I don't know if this is necessarily something I want that much either, right? So I mean, the next level up is to I think that what I've seen in this in this academic game so far is that I feel like I'm doing pretty well in terms of like someone in my position has.
Mhm.
Um, but there is like a fairly big gap still between like doing pretty well as basically being able to have a pretty good career as an academic and like if you're a faculty at a top school, there's a pretty big gap I think, and like it's not clear to me that there's a straightforward way to jump that gap. And therefore I don't really care at this point, right? I just do
Mm.
what I do and it's like it's all good, but like you can definitely tell there's a gap.
Mm. And do you think that there is it like is it this quantum leap for everyone who wants to get there, or is there like a more gradual way to kind of
I don't
rise
think there's
up?
a gradual way. I mean, like the practical thing is that like, in practice, it's like as you go along in your career, you don't really make that big quantum leap at this point, right? Like no one really does. If you didn't really start out on that path, you don't really that doesn't really happen. And it's fine because most people are not in the, top three schools or whatever. And like most people have a perfectly good career, right?
Yeah. Like, what was I gonna? Do you feel like that there's some secret to do it, or like,
Um, I don't think so. I don't think there's like a magical switch. I think there's a lot of confluence of factors that combine throughout someone's, early life and training and early career and stuff. I don't think there's like a uh yeah, I mean, it's I think it's like if you if someone is how it's a decent example. I mean, the decent example is like, if you went to a Division 1 college on a football or basketball scholarship and you're like good enough to play in college, but like you don't make the pros, right? And you're like and then you might play, overseas or something, or you might like, do some exhibition things or in the minors and stuff. And after a few years, you're like, all right, I'm not going to make the pros. Like at this point, there's nothing I can do at this point to do that. So, therefore I'm gonna live out my career and be happy with the career. Like, because in order to get to that point, you have to be, Kobe Bryant at an early age or whatever, right? And like, if you're not, there's nothing like, you don't like feel bad about it, because you're like, that's just the circumstances.
Yeah, yeah. Like in that case, in athletics, there's kind of this notion that, you know, the talent kind of sorts itself out, meaning that like if you are good enough, then the belief is that, there's a market of people looking for athletes who can perform. And so therefore, the idea is that someone's going to discover you, right?
Mhm.
Like, whereas in academia, I feel like the divide is a little more arbitrary, but I don't know what your sense is in terms of like, is there a clear quality gap in your view? Like, what's your mental model in terms of how does the sorting take place in terms of these are top tier professors, and then,
I think a big sort early on is, you know, uh, hitting upon the right area to work in when you're in graduate school, and having the right mentors who are themselves on the way up, right? Or very active. Yeah, I think that pretty much I can say for sure that everybody who is at the top of their game in their field, the people who were their advisors or who were their mentors, like those people weren't schlubs either, right? Like those people are either on their way up or already world-class people.
Mhm.
And, because of that kind of synergy, they're on kind of a path that is not accessible, I would say, to most people.
Mm-mm. And so let's say that this was your number one ambition, right? Like, like you sound like, okay, even if this is all there is, like, this is pretty sweet, right? But like, if your number one priority was to somehow figure out how to bridge this gap and, get one of these positions,
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I feel like I have a pretty good gig. I'm just writing on my crazy whiteboards up here. A pretty good gig. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, here's a good analogy. I mean, the analogy is this. The analogy is, I feel like everybody sorts somewhere, right? So the analogy is that, like, imagine if, I was like the first person in my high school to get an MIT or to go to MIT, like, in forever, right?
Mhm.
And like, imagine there were a bunch of other kids who were in my class who were like, oh, it would have been awesome if I could go to MIT or Harvard or one of these like top schools. But like, I just didn't have the training for it. And like, nobody in my school ever got into these places. And like, we just didn't have any background in it. So like, if imagine their senior year, they're going to UCSD or UCLA or Berkeley and stuff. And they're like, this is pretty chill, right? This is a good place. Like, it's all good. Like, yeah, I've been awesome if I got an MIT or Harvard, but like, whatever, right? Like at that point in 12th grade, you're like, oh, what thing could I have done differently? I don't know, right? Because there was just so many of these factors involved. And like, I think that's a fairly reasonable analogy for that. It's like, if you're going to most reasonable colleges, like, your life is going to be okay, right? It's not like you're going to be out in the street poor. So I feel like for many people in their jobs, like, I think this is my realistic view, is that you are most likely not the number one or number two or number three person in the world in your job. And that's okay, because there's room for more than three people, right?
Mhm.
And like, you can have a really good sustainable career without that. Um, I think it's, I think it's, I mean, I think in a lot of fields is like that, right? I mean, like, if you're like, I'm gonna be, I want to do data science or machine learning, you're probably not gonna be like the number 1 to 10 machine learning masters in the world. But that doesn't mean you just give up and say, I'm not gonna do machine learning. You could still have a really awesome career in it, even if you're not the top 10 person in the world in it, right?
Yeah, I guess for me, like something like data science. Well, if you start with athletics, right? Like,
And then you go to
you look at
data
Brian,
science.
you say, hey, like, I could beat you, but he'll just say, hey, come on, play me one on one, and then let's settle this, like, in terms of a ranking, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And like, very quickly it's settled. Okay, this guy is clearly better than me. Like, no questions, right?
Right, right,
I
right.
feel like in other fields, it's a little fuzzier, this comparison, right? And so, like, is there,
Well, I mean, I think
um,
there is still a comparison, right? I mean, you can compare people's creative or work outputs, and like, yeah, I mean, I think there is a direct comparison. But the thing is, it's institutional, right? So it's like, for example, you know, there's Jeff Dean, and then there's somebody who's just as smart as Jeff Dean, but they're like in the middle of nowhere, like working at Kinko's or something, and like you're like, all right, Jeff Dean has obviously led this group at Google Brain doing all this really awesome stuff. Last year they published 20 papers, they like got TensorFlow out, they got whatever. This like fake Jeff Dean hasn't done jack squat, and then you're like, it's not like fake Jeff Dean and Jeff Dean go head to head in like a math contest. Like maybe like if they go head to head in like a programming contest, the fake Jeff Dean does just as well, right?
oh, okay, okay. So in your view, you you agree? I mean, so the community kind of ranks
Yes, that's
output.
exactly right. That's right. It's ranked by your output in your community. That's right. Whether if it's in papers or it's in you're leading a company, or it's in like you literally you're Drew Houston, you literally take Dropbox to IPO or whatever, right? Like there's a thing, right? It's like if you were put in his position, you could probably do the same thing, but you were not in his position, right? It
Mm-mm.
doesn't make sense to like put two people head to head and have like a have like a math contest or whatever, right? Because that's not what you're ranking on, right? It's ranking on like the community sees your
So you,
output.
in your mental model of how the world works, the people you associate with have a huge impact on like your output. Because otherwise, like this guy in the Midwest, right? It seems like it would be a fair fight, right? Like with someone.
Yeah, yeah, oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, if Jeff Dean had an identical twin and they grew up in different places, yeah, yeah, totally, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, if you have an identical twin that you grew up somewhere else, then yeah, your life path is completely different. And I think there's often not a realistic way to catch up. And I mean, another issue with this is time, right? As more time goes on, realistically, it's just so hard to catch up because you just don't have the institutional resources in place. Yeah, I think that it's totally it, that this is, and one could argue the same thing about athletics too, right? That's like if you had someone with just as good genes and reasonable training and stuff, like it's just so hard to make up for all those years of training at like top level and competing at the top level, just the both the physical aspects and also just the mental aspects, right? Like even if you're just like an awesome basketball player from somewhere with like really gifted genes and you're physically in good shape, you just don't have that experience, right? That someone who's been playing for real does.
Yeah, yeah. So do you think that like if Jeff Dean today, I mean, I hate to, overuse him as an example, but it's a concrete one. Like if he like same brain, right? Same training.
Right.
Like if he just was stripped of his identity, right?
Mm.
And became like Bob Smith, right?
Oh, that's
No
a good question.
track record. Like is there I mean, maybe he can't get back to his current job, but like
Mm.
what
They're saying, given a clone right now, right? It's like a Star Trek thing of like, given someone has the entire history and training and all that stuff, but their identity is stripped and they're, have to make a start in Russia or something.
yeah, like how much of it is the training and how much of it is the surrounding,
Yeah. Um, I think a lot. I mean, I think the surrounding is a lot of it. I mean, I think it's a huge amount of it. I mean, it's they talk about this for startups too, right? Of how they coalesce around Silicon Valley or certain areas, right? It's like you just people try to replicate Silicon Valley in other places, and it's just can't do it just because of just the weird forces historically that have come together to do this. Like, you know, from the really early days of Silicon Valley with these folks coming out west from these semiconductor companies and kind of going rogue and establishing these research labs and having partnerships with Stanford and like just the founding of the valley in the 50s and 60s and stuff. Like it's just such a really unique place, and then like that ethos got carried forward and then people with money came, and like I just think it's so hard to do that somewhere else, right? I mean, I feel like I am a believer that if you have with reasonable training and work ethic and some kind of ability, you can make a good life for yourself locally optimizing wherever you are. I think that's definitely doable. But I think getting to world class level, I think it's just really hard. I think it's just very hard, especially now. I think it's just so much harder to be world class in anything because it's like, you know, there's people with a lot of more advantages and there's a lot of them.
Mm-mm. And if you were somewhere that you consider like off the grid, right? And your goal is to maximize your ability, like what would your advice be? Like move to Silicon Valley, or I mean, even if you did that, like what more could you do to?
Yeah, well, I think that moving. I mean, I think that is a big thing. I mean, it is a cliche, but I think getting yourself into a position where you're around a certain ambiance, I think is. I mean, it may not be Silicon Valley, maybe another place. It may be, you know, a smaller city, but still closer to where you want to be. Yeah, I think the physical location is huge. Yeah, I think that's absolutely huge. And if you can't be physically located somewhere, I mean, a lot of these people who are doing open source software work, they work remotely, right? But they kind of have a presence both online and they also travel to these conferences, right? They have all these developer conferences and open source and like they go on the speaking circuit and stuff. So that's one way to kind of get known, even if you're living kind of not in, not in a very prominent place. So you have a both an online presence plus you go to these kind of conferences and such and schmooze in that way, right? That's one path I see people take.
Yeah, and one question I have for you in particular, like when you submit, say, a paper, right, and you get the feedback, like on average, do you agree with the feedback, or uh, I mean, how different are opinions in terms of like what work is high
Yeah,
quality
I mean,
versus not?
I mean, I guess a way to answer a different question is I don't ever feel like, you know, at a disadvantage because of where I am or such like that. I don't ever feel like that. And it's definitely not the case. I also don't feel like, having been on programming committees, I also don't feel like, at least in, and this is what have I seen, it's not like, oh, someone's like really famous or like we obviously know this work is really well known. We have to like get this in. Like I feel like there is a fairness in that.
Mm-mm.
For the most part, people try to be as fair as they can, but obviously you can't be perfectly impartial. The question about feedback quality is, I think that this is kind of going with the zeitgeist or the market, quote unquote, of what is acceptable work at a time, and that's something that you just have to suss out as a community as well. I mean, this is interesting because you know, um, the extreme end of this, people actually study this, are like people in fields like pure math and physics, there's all these cranks, right? There's people like from the ends of the earth who are self-publishing or submitting weird stuff or cold emailing people or putting stuff on archive. And it's like this grand unified theory is or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And these are more popular in mathematical and physics fields and stuff. And like, and there's like well-known kinds of smells or indicators of that. And I find it's interesting, right? Because on one hand, it's like, you know, there is this romantic notion of what if the next great mathematician to do something completely new or to prove something that's been unproven is in the middle of nowhere because this happened before, right?
Uh-huh.
But it's like for the most part, that's not the case. And like even for the ones who have been discovered out of nowhere, they have, I mean, just going off a tangent, but like, they have obviously shown a deep knowledge of the historical lineage of the work and known how to build off of other people's work and such. And it's not just like, oh, I'm just going to make up some new notation and some weird thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
even though
yeah.
these people are in the middle of nowhere, they've studied all these books and all these proofs and they build it up in a legit way so that when they approach people, when someone finds them, like, they're like, all right, this person, like, this seems like they look legit. All right.
Yeah, yeah. And is there something similar in your community? Like weird submissions or
I think that the only ones I see, I don't see that many, but I think the only ones are like these. There are occasionally like weird ones. I think they come from, I mean, you could say they just come from random people. Um, I think a lot of it is in like more applied fields. It's like, my view of this is like, random person has some kind of a small business or some kind of consulting company or something that they've been doing for a while. They have some like really old looking website and then they want to submit not only papers, but to the like NSF grants. Like they submit these kinds of grants to try to get these quasi business, quasi research projects kind of funded. And it's like a certain style, like of uh it's like Yeah, it's pretty clear that there's an outlier there, right?
And does that type of submission ever get funded or?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, or the papers
Oh.
don't get it. I don't think so. Like I mean, yeah, probably at like if you just like pay to publish somewhere really crappy, probably, right? But like not anywhere legit. Like I'm pretty sure. Um, yeah, yeah. I
Because
mean, I have not seen it. Go ahead.
it seems plausible that a business could come up with some direction that has research merit, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue though is that like, no, that's a good question. Like, I think it's just issue is that you know, I think that even if that were the case, like they probably had not developed it enough to a point or presented it well enough to the point where it like feels rigorous, right? Maybe that's what it is. That
mm,
like for the most part, what happens is, you think you're doing something really awesome, and then like it's actually not super original at all, right?
yeah, yeah.
Because originality is what's key in academia, right? And research. And like, it's fine. I mean, your business might be working fine, right? It's like, I mean, let's say, somebody's running and, a local tutoring business in Iowa or something. And they're like, yeah, we have a website. We hooked it up to Khan Academy and we like customized some of the Khan Academy exercises. That was tight. And like, we're making some money and stuff, and like they submit some paper writing about it. It's like, all right, that's not that really that interesting, right? It's like that's cool. Right? It's like I'm sure it worked for you. It sounds good, right? But like I don't know what there is for us to learn beyond you took Khan Academy and you like, put it on your site and it was tight. All right.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So
So there's a
it's
lot
not.
of that, but you're right that maybe they happen to have come on something really interesting, the seeds of something really interesting, but like they would just not have the ability to develop it in a mature enough way to present it in that way. And also, like, why would they care to, right? Because that's not their main goal.
I think they want the money from the grant.
Oh yeah,
Like,
yeah. Well, for grant, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, for papers, yeah, yeah. But it's like I just think it's just so hard for those things to get funded. I mean, there are these SBIR grants that are like that are for small businesses to commercialize research. But the thing is, there's a whole game there too, right? There are like these defense contractors and like these smaller or mid-sized companies. Like what I'm basically saying is that every game you're in, there are going to be established players who know how to do it. So like if you're
mm,
an individual kind of person, like it's just so hard for you to break into anything. I mean, this gets back in the beginning, right? But like, for example, if you're going for these SBIR, these sorts of more corporate, these kinds of government contracts for developing R&D work for something that's commercializable, there's a whole path of that and people apply for that. But like the ones who get it are like companies who have again, this goes back to the resources, right? They have people there who have been writing these grants for decades. They know the program managers, they know the winds, they kind of smell where the forces are headed, and they know how to cater their grants to that. Whereas if you're just some person throwing a dart, you're not going to be at the top of the pile, right? I guess the thing is like these things are so competitive that you can't just manage to throw a dart and hit, because even people who are trying hard are not hitting, right?
mm.
So like I guess the idea is that like, I've reviewed a lot of papers and a fair amount of grants also, and it's like you basically for these cases, like you're on the bottom of the pile, right? Like it's pretty easy to stack rank but like you end up on the bottom of the pile and there's no chance, because even many legit people are in the middle of the pile and they might not get funded or they might not get their paper in, right? Like imagine like, all of us trying hard in grad school, we might not have been the most legit, but we at least were in the like legit section, right? At least we're in the ballpark. Okay, like this seems like a legit submission, but like, oh, we have these issues. This is kind of incremental. Maybe this is not really what we're feeling. But like, if you're totally an outsider, you're like at the bottom of that pile.
So if you, let's say, because I think, these business people who come up with these research grants, it might be on par with like, say, a first year PhD student who has like a crackpot idea. And then like, can that person get feedback to kind of move in the right direction, or are they so far off that you're just kind of like, okay, like I mean, the PhD student, I mean, you're supposed to nurture that person, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's what the environment is. Like imagine the PhD student, or the, the analogy in industry is the first year employee in one of these government contracting organizations where the game is to get these grants and to
Mhm.
defense contracts or government contracts. Yeah, your first one, you're like, all right, let's try to do one. And like your first one probably sucks, but then you have apparently a growth processor because like within your organization or within a university, you can look at other people's submissions, you can look at other people's reviews, people talk to you about it. You can watch, maybe other people have you help out, right? It's kind of like the second author thing, right? Like they have you help out on their grant or they have you help out on their paper or they go to when you're going to a meeting in Washington, D.C. and when the higher ups are schmoozing, you're in the room kind of apprenticing, and you have that apprenticeship. And then eventually you start learning the game more and more. But whereas if you're really on the outside, you just don't have any of that path into learning the game. This goes back to the thing at the beginning of the hour of like, you just can't read about this online, right? Like it's just so hard to learn about this independently.
Yeah. And I think, with the PhD student, like you're in an institution, right? And so there's a process there. If you're in a company, and you're writing these grants as a job, like,
Yeah, it's your job. I mean, it's part of your professional development. And yeah, I mean, the mentorship may not be perfect, but at least you like get it by osmosis because like you're going to, I mean, I know people who work at these government contracting firms and it's like the name of the game is you have to keep getting these grants to keep your division alive and stuff. So like every day in, day out, you're living and breathing this stuff, right? Like when people have a victory, they celebrate, if their grants get rejected, they're complaining about it. Like you're living and breathing it every day, right? Whereas if you're just on the outside and you're doing it on the side, or you're like trying, it's just, you're not living and breathing it. And it's, yeah, that's the depressing truth.
So, I mean, in your eyes, it sounds like it's a long shot to kind of get in if you're not associated with an institution.
I think it's really hard. I mean, I think that trying to compete at the top levels is really hard. And I would consider, getting competitively in both in publishing or like raising venture capital money or getting these government funding sources to do this stuff. Like these things are just hard, right? But like that's not to say that like you can't have a reasonable career otherwise, right? Like I think there's a big enough pie for a lot of people that like just trying to compete at these high levels is just hard.
I guess part of the reason why I'm asking is that like when you're starting a company, there's a similar dynamic in that like if you want to raise a VC round, you give a pitch and then like, they don't necessarily give feedback as to why they don't like it. And they might even say explicitly that they don't like it, but there's just like, oh, thank you. And let's keep in touch. And then that's the end of it, right? Like,
yeah, so I guess my thing with that would be like, you are in hopefully the best area to do this, right? That yeah, you don't count on the gatekeepers to give you feedback. I think that's what it's like. The gatekeepers are probably not the ones giving feedback. It's your peers and the people who are in it along for the ride, right? Like that's the difference between people wanting to move to San Francisco and start companies and starting them wherever they live, because where they live, they do a pitch on Shark Tank or whatever, and they like doesn't work, and like, all right, now what? Or I don't know what to do. And then they go on Hacker News and they complain, right? But like if you're in the Valley, you give these pitches, yeah, a lot of them's not going to work, but then your cohort people in your cohort, people who are your peers also doing this, they're also complaining about not getting funded, and they like maybe like, oh yeah, maybe the person I talked to today, they're not interested in this area, but they might be interested in your area because they have this new focus in education or whatever. And then you talk to other people like that. So I think it is a community thing, right? Like that's the difference between being in Silicon Valley doing the exact same thing you're doing and being like, in Siberia doing it or in Greenland or something.
Yeah, I guess for me, part of the thing was that like, we would apply to, like, I'm in this incubator Stardex. We would apply to it and then we would get rejected and then be like, we don't get it, right? And then once we got in and we've been in it for a while, then we're asked to be a judge, right? And then once you go behind the closed doors, then everything makes a ton of sense, right? But like before then, there's this knowledge gap and it seems pretty tough to bridge, especially if your friends are not people who have gotten across.
Yeah, oh, it's huge. I think this is huge. I mean, yeah, this is and I think this is why, I mean, this is my sobering reality too, is that like even in the age of, plentiful information and, assuming you're not super poor, you have a cell phone and you have internet access, you can literally look up anything, right? I mean, you like basically find out anything you want, right? Like on YouTube, on the internet, from whatever sources, you can get anything you want pretty much. And yet still there's such a big knowledge gap and like a know-how gap and that gap, like it still persists, even if in theory you should be able to pick up all this stuff.
So I mean, there's no like insight there. It's just like a really tough problem, and
Yeah, I
just
think this is the biggest gap. I think this is a huge gap, and I think that's you know, um, I think one of the benefits still of universities as institutions is a place to build these sorts of connections in person and try to bridge that gap somehow with your peers and alumni and folks that it's still there's still something there, right? Even if you could literally learn everything in your classes online, which you can, right?
and then in your experience, like I think I've asked this before, but I mean, I forgot your exact answer. Like, was it a gradual process, like getting across this gap, or like were there a couple moments that were felt more of a leap in terms of first year PhD, you kind of there's some naive beliefs that you have that kind of get in the way, then you figure it out. I mean, right now you're a professor, so at
That's
some
a really
point you
funny
cross this
question
gap.
because I feel like I somehow jumped that gap in just a weird way. So I feel like ever since I decided, I got my first faculty position and I, delayed it and did my postdoc. Ever since, let's say, summer 2013, right? Summer 2013, when I'm like, I'm back in this game for good. Until now, 5 years, I don't feel like there has been that giant jump. I feel like it's been ratcheting up and up and up, and I feel
Mm.
like every step along the way has been smooth. Um, all the while knowing that it's a smooth path. It's a smooth path to growth, but I'm not going to have that giant leap until the top one, top two, top three level. But that's fine because this is the trajectory I wanted, and I felt like it was doable without any giant jumps. Now the question is, how did I get there from where I was in grad school? And I think that was just a fortuitous timing. Like that was very much taking advantage of the timing of the job market at that time and figuring out, and that leap literally was just taking advantage of that gap in time. um and if I had if I were going to try to apply for faculty jobs the year before, we probably wouldn't really get anywhere because there wasn't the situation just was not right set up wise. And like if I had waited another year, it would have been just the timing, just it would have been not as bad as the year before, but wouldn't have been as good as when I got in. And a lot of times this timing is once you get into these sorts of career tracks, then it's a matter of just not screwing up and just continuing to climb at that in a natural way and figuring out what's next. And you don't need that giant. Yeah. So I think just if you look at the numbers, right, the gap between getting a PhD and getting into a tenure track professor position is a giant gap. That's a giant gap. But then the path to building a successful career is a much more smooth one. Right? I think the next giant gap is if you literally want to be, at MIT or something, right? Like that's the giant gap. But like most people, don't aspire to that, and it doesn't really matter. You can still build a successful career without a next giant leap.
And then once you got your first job, what allowed you to kind of make that smooth
I think
improvement?
I think I just learned as much about as I could. Yeah, I mean, I was very ravenous about just learning as much as I could. I read a lot online about stuff. I read a lot. I talked to people a lot. That felt very ravenous in the very first year of getting as much information as I could and taking notes. But like all the while, like that didn't feel weird because like I was starting in this path and people expected I had these questions, and it didn't feel weird at all. I didn't feel like I was being judged or anything. And I'm very glad I did that, right? Because now it's like if now 5 years later I have like super noob questions, it seems kind of weird.
Like is did getting the position make the learning easier, or
Yeah,
like
yeah.
oh,
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's right. So, I mean, like, if you're, yeah, if you didn't have that position in the first place, and you like, one is you're not motivated. It's like, well, how are you motivated to look into all this? It's such specific stuff, right? These are non-transferable skills. Like, why would you even look into it before you get into the game? And the second one is, yeah, it's like people don't care that much about helping you that much because they're like, oh, you're just like a random student, right?
mm,
So yeah, and also gives you the confidence to do that because you're like, all right, I'm on this path that you know, it's all good. I just have to do really well in it. Right.
Okay, okay. So if you tried a similar thing while you were a grad student, you either need like
Yeah.
a really thick skin or like, I
Yeah.
mean, 'cause
And it's like,
some of
and
the
it's
stuff,
not even clear if that would
yeah.
help. Right. Cause like, it's kind of like you being in the Starbucks judge, right? Like there's all these factors out of your control that it's not even clear whether optimizing for that when you're in grad school wouldn't even help that much.
I mean, presumably you got better at writing papers too, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was just, that's just doing it more and being part again, this is a community thing, right? Like if you're part of the community more, you just get better and better alignment. Like your view of what seems to be, you know, easier to publish or more timely or more with the times just gets better and better aligned, right?
mm-mm.
So you just go from like, I mean, yeah, I mean, then your acceptance rates just go up a lot, right? As you just become more aligned. I mean, yeah, you don't get everything in, obviously. You can't get everything in all the time, but like it's a lot better than when you're starting out and when you didn't really have a good sense of the lay of the land.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little more about this notion of alignment? So like what makes it easier to what makes your acceptance rate go up?
Um, there's several parts of it. I mean, one is just greater expertise and momentum, right? So like, the idea is if even now, if I were to just break into some new field or new subfield, even within HCF, if I were to do something new subfield, chances are the ideas that we're to come up with are pretty superficial, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
fairly trite because, whatever you can think of in 5 minutes or an hour on the board, probably a lot of other people can think of something better, right? Who've been in it for a while. So I think it's just, if you've been in an area for a while, you just understand the related work, you understand what you're doing, you just build up deeper insights. So that just makes it easier inherently because you're just deeper in. And then also like you review a lot more papers, you read a lot more papers, you just get a more sense of it's kind of like it's like a sixth sense more, right? You just are better aligned with the sense. And this is say like if you're out of the game for a while, right? If you're like, if you work in, administration or you like take a leave somewhere and you're not active in researching your area, if you come back in 5 years, you're like, it's really hard to align, I think, because you're like, what just happened, right?
Oh, okay,
Yeah, so
okay.
it's not like it's permanent, like it's something that's continually upkeep, but it doesn't feel like it takes effort to upkeep if you're actively in an area, right? If you're actively trying to submit paper, and one great example is every paper you do, you have to like understand the related work and see what's up with it. So then you kind of expand your notions of what's up with that, and then you just kind of keep expanding, and you kind of just have a sense of things. But yeah, I mean that if you transfer to another area, there's no guarantee that transfers, right?
Mm-mm. And was there like a moment for you where, because I think the naive view is you're just on a whiteboard sketching out stuff, but now you're more pragmatic. You're saying, okay, here's the existing body of work. Here's kind of the trends, and okay, let me. I think that this area is fruitful, and so I'm going to focus my effort here. Like it seems like a pretty different mentality. Like, was it a gradual shift to that ability to focus on something that's likely to be fruitful?
Um, I think I had that fairly early on too, because then I realized even in grad school that the whiteboard thing isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Well, now it's not a matter of like looking at related work and seeing what would be fruitful. It's more like again, it's like there's already a momentum here that's going. So like basically, I just keep picking stuff off of this train that seems to be aligned, and then like there's more hits than misses, right? Like
Mm-mm.
there's already a train going, and like I just have to stay on this track for a while.
Mm-mm. So once you have something, once you hit something, then you're like, okay, I could kind of hammer somewhere
Yeah, you just
around
keep
there.
cranking. You just keep cranking. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I have, if you look at my whiteboards, I have these two whiteboards. I have that one right there. It's two-sided. And then I have, three whiteboards in my office, three whiteboards in my lab. Like there's a lot of whiteboard space, right? And like there's a lot for me to plot. I look like a wild person on a conspiracy hunt or something. I mean, I look like a quack, but like there's just like stuff all over my whiteboards, right? I'm just like there there's webs of connections and everything. And yeah, and I think there's a there's a train that's going, and like I have probably about, I would say, depending on circumstances and stuff, probably like I would say 1.5 2 years until 10-year review, around that range, maybe a little more, depends on how things go, but like I'm keeping on this train until then, right? There's no getting off the train until then.
Mm-mm-mm.
Like there's no pivoting to a whole different area until this train is, at least, there's a body that's complete.
Yeah. So your submission 18 months from now, you have a fairly decent idea of like where that's like
Yeah, I don't know.
roughly.
I don't necessarily know the exact same projects, but I know the space. Like I know,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, there's a generally acceptable space. And like, I have students and they have their own direction and stuff, but they're all around the same space. Like
Mm-mm.
they're all fairly well, and this is the alignment thing too, right? They're fairly aligned to that space because like they kind of know what my space is and where we have a just pragmatically have expert institutional expertise in, right?
Mm-mm. And how is it interacting with your students? Like, how does the dynamic change in terms of like I imagine with the newer students it's a little more hand holding and then at some point they they kind of take more ownership. Is that kind of how it
Yeah,
works
I
or
mean, I think everyone is unique. I think everyone is unique, and I think you know, a lot of the work has broadened out a fair amount, but it's still, within this general realm that I can spin a story around. But it is this unique partnership where we have to leverage both of our strengths, right? If I'm like, I've never had the case work where I'm like, okay, like here is a thing for you to do, and you just got to do it, regardless of who it is, right? Because then it's just this is an alignment issue, right? The chances that's well aligned is not that high. But fortunately, my interests are broad enough that there will be some strength and alignment somehow. But it does take work to figure out how those pieces lock together.
that makes sense. If I got a question about the whiteboard, like the when you write notes, like is that hard work or is that like is that during one of your periods of time when you're doing serious work or
No, the whiteboards
um
are not serious work. Like the whiteboards are all good. This is just it's a scratch space for me to whatever I put up. So this may be the dreaming, the dreaming boards. Yeah, no. If I'm working, I'm on the computer.
okay.
Yeah, I'm on the computer.
And when you typically do you have a time where it's like most likely you're gonna come up with something that goes on the whiteboard?
I don't know. I mean, probably just like when I'm chilling at night or something, and like if something is on my
Uh,
mind, I just write it down. It's just like a nice
yeah.
scratch space, and things might connect later. A lot of things might not connect.
And how often do you erase it?
Not that often, like maybe once every few months.
Oh,
I
okay,
fill it
okay.
all up, and then I look at it and erase it. Yeah, I fill it all up. Yeah, I don't erase.
That's pretty cool,
So
man.
after a while, everything just gets full, and then I'm like, all right, I better erase. Yes, it's like once every few months.
Hey Phil, just this is kind of random, but I really like Headspace, dude.
Oh, you're really feeling it? All right. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad you're using.
And I saw that you did meditation for like, there was a solid period of time where you were pretty committed to it.
Yeah, that was like last year at this time, maybe a little earlier. Yeah, when I first got it. Yeah, I just did it every day for like 10 minutes, but then I fell
And
off the
how was
wagon.
that?
It was fine, and I fell off the wagon because I got busy with these deadlines and stuff. I just fell off the wagon, and I was like, yeah. I mean, I didn't feel like I needed it, right? I was like, all right, it's all good. Like it wasn't like I didn't have trouble sleeping. I was like, oh, I'm all good.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Hey,
think
can you
it's.
talk about your yeah.
Can we talk about the meditation?
No, no, no. Can you talk about anything you're working on?
I don't think it's like super interesting. I mean, we got a few more minutes left,
Uh,
but I mean, I can give you the general super high level spiels. You know, I had a meta thought about this. My meta thought is that like it's hard for. I mean, it's hard for me to answer that because what I'm working on is the union of all the stuff my students are working on, right? So it's
mm-mm.
like it's like a weird. It's a hard question to answer without being super cliche because it's whatever lasso I can wrap around all the active projects, right?
Uh,
But the roundabout answer to this is that I'm forcing myself to go and give a bunch of talks, hopefully in the Bay Area and May and some other places, and I'm getting to the point where I feel like I have another talk tour I want to give, and that'll actually give a good answer to that. It forces me to crystallize a lot of the work. into like a 1 hour kind of talk. And it will just be good for publicity and for things. So, but again, I haven't thought about that until the set deadlines passes.
So the projects come first, and then the vision kind of that unifies them comes later.
Yeah, I mean it's back. I mean, I had to do a promotion thing last summer, so then I had to make up a vision, a unifying vision, which I like doing. You know, it was a good forcing function. So then, since then, I can try to fit everything I do around the bullet points in that spiel. Um,
Mm-mm.
and it all fits. I mean, it's like Iron Chef. Everything finds a way to fit. But yeah, I mean, but then later on, it's like it's ultimately the papers you get in that forms the backbone of the stuff, right? I mean, I can have a vision of that all I want, but if I don't back it up with anything, then it's kind of empty, right? So then you kind of
Yeah.
alter that. You kind of alter the presentation of that vision to cover the strongest work, right?
Mm-mm. That
So
makes sense.
it's a double-sided sort of thing. But I think it's iterative, right? It's back and forth, both top down and bottom up. And like you have to generate a bunch of work that's sort of interesting and related, and then you unify with something, and then you kind of generate more work. But I've personally found that, again, this goes back to the topic earlier of, if you're really trying to compete at the highest levels, this ideas you're going to generate and work on with your collaborators and student stuff, they're all going to be pretty related because you only have expertise in one area. Right. So
Mm-mm.
without explicitly trying to articulate a vision, it will eventually, I mean, things will be fairly clumped, and then you can like put a good bow on top of it. It
Okay.
is not the case that you can publish top papers in like all these different areas, right? Especially starting out, right?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
So like your stuff is gonna cluster around something, and then the goal is to put a good story around that something that you already have a clump around.
How often do you come up with insights when you you write papers and then you give a talk that unifies them? Does that ever suggest a new paper, or is that a
Yeah,
relatively
I
rare
mean, I think
thing?
that's it. I don't know about suggesting new papers, but I think it helps. Yeah, I think that synthesis, forcing myself to do this talk thing and to synthesize, which I hopefully will be able to do after the other set of deadlines. I want to take some time to do it, and then I have to do some grant writing and other stuff. And like that for synthesis, I think does help. And I think that going back to the beginning of feedback and stuff, like I don't think I do enough of that for synthesis. So I force myself to do it more because
Mm-mm.
uh, left to my own devices, I'll just like keep on grinding on papers, which is fortunately a good thing. But like I haven't done the synthesis much. And then there are other people who like love the super framing but don't like grind on papers,
Oh, okay. Like, why do people like the grinding on like, it's because they get good feedback from their talks, or?
Yeah, I get, and it's like easier, right? Because then you don't have to do all the grinding work in a way.
Mm.
But I don't know. It's a balance, right? And like the nice thing about the leading with papers is that like the other stuff can come, around it, right? That once the foundation has been laid, the other stuff can be layered more.
Ah, yeah, yeah. Like the people who come vision first, like, do the vision sound sexier or on average?
I don't know. Yeah, I guess because I mean, all vaporware sounds really good, right? It's like all these startups that raise a bunch of money and they don't make anything, right? It's like yeah, I mean, they had to have sounded really good to raise that money in the first place, right?
Yeah, like that's my sense that if you optimize for the vision, then it sounds better maybe than if you write papers and then you kind of put a bow around it, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, but whether you're able to follow through and build a sustainable career out of it is the key, right?
That makes sense.
So, but I don't know. It's a hard topic. Do you have any last words of wisdom from this hour? You've like probed so much.
No, no, just no, it's just pretty cool that I don't know. Yeah, we always revisit the same topics, but it's pretty.
Terrible, man. Terrible.
No, I was just thinking, you had that YouTube video about writing grants, right? And how like it's a low percentage game, and so you gotta like mentally get
Yeah.
yourself into a state of mind where you don't see it as a waste of time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a. I find myself even like when I'm doing stuff for the company, it's like not everything pays off, and so you without that mental trick of saying this is going to be worth it, then
Oh yeah,
I
there's
find
no
it
other
tough
way
to put it.
forward. Yeah, I mean, if you're
Yeah.
dedicated to that path, there's no other way forward. I mean, because otherwise you just psych yourself out and you don't even start. Yeah, and it's uh, yeah, I think I said this on one of the other podcast interviews with someone else. I remember there's a really good Star Trek episode, Next Generation, and I told the story before. It's like what was it? So there was the Captain Picard, the captain and the doctor Beverly Crusher, they were attached like telepathically. They were on this planet. They were stranded and they had to be like stuck together, like their minds were connected for some reason. So then they were trying to navigate the terrain to try to see whether they could escape or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And then, they were somewhere, and then like she asked the captain, she's like, which way do you think we should go? And he like said in his most sure voice, he's like, we got to go this way. Right. And then because she could read his mind, she's like, wait, you have no idea which way to go. She's like, you have no idea which way to go. She's like, do you do this all the time? And he's like, well, if you're the captain, you have to be able to project that, you have to make decisions under uncertainty. And you just say, like, we just got to go with this because, like, the alternative is to waver and then everybody just, like, gets demoralized and flips out, right? I mean, you obviously want to make better decisions than chance, but you're never going to be making decisions under perfect information, right? And like, I think it's important, not to deceive it. People know that, right? It's important for people to know that who are working at this, like, yeah, I have no guarantee this is going to be successful, but this is probably, A is probably better than B. So we got to go hard on A because if we don't, we're just going to sit here and waver.
Yeah, yeah. That's a beautiful episode, man. I hadn't heard it.
Yeah, I said it in one of the other podcasts randomly. I had to do a Picard impression, but yeah, I find that a lot. I mean, but I'm honest with people. I'm open. I'm like, I can't guarantee that there's gonna be good results, but my best intuitions that this is better than the other one. So we're gonna go with it because this has a higher chance of success, I think, but it's not 100% at all by all means.
Very cool, man.
Man, another round of tough truth, man.
All right, dude. Yeah, this was good.
All right, man. All right, we're gonna sign off. This is good. All right, until next time.